smaller than a major test that you guys have had in the past. Okay, so the whole test is from chapter 6, which is really starting with Jackson, Andrew Jackson, and going all the way until kind of the start of the Civil War, and really kind of the beginning of the Civil War is what we can kind of draw the questions from. So let's kind of just get going. So hopefully if you guys have questions as we go, we'll go from there. So I'm going to kind of use one of my older PowerPoints, which kind of covers a lot of the same stuff. So let's just kind of recap, right, as some of the Manifest Destiny stuff. In 1820 you have this Missouri Compromise, and the Missouri Compromise is this whole thing that's going on, maintaining the balance in Congress, right? You're going to have new territories coming in as slave states or free states, and it's going to upset that balance in the Senate in particular when you get one of these new states. So in 1820 you're going to get Missouri looking to apply for statehood, and it's going to upset that balance in Congress. So what they ultimately decide is to have these new states come in. So you have Missouri come in, it's going to be a slave state, and then Maine is going to be adopted as well. And that way it maintains that balance, right? So you're going to kind of keep pushing on through here. We talked about the Monroe Doctrine. This is maybe a little bit older than what you guys need to know for your quiz. So let's kind of keep going, right? So in 1824, you're going to have this election of between a number of these Democratic Republicans. If you remember, after the War of 1812, you're basically going to have the Federalist Party disappear, right? And you're going to have left the Democratic Republicans. And at this point, you're going to have 4 people running, and they're going to be called these favorite sons, right? The big ones that you're going to really need to worry about is Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams is going to ultimately become the president, and Andrew Jackson actually will have won the electoral votes, but it wouldn't have gotten the majority in the Electoral College. And if you remember, that's when the decision is actually made in the House of Representatives. So what happens is basically John Quincy Adams is going to work a deal with a man named Henry Clay, who was also in the race, as you remember. And Henry Clay was the Speaker of the House, and he's able to convince the House of Representatives to vote for John Quincy Adams. And in doing so, he's going to be chosen as the Secretary of State, and this is going to become known as the corrupt bargain. So even though Jackson won the electoral votes and the popular vote, he didn't get the majority and isn't going to get the presidency, so it's going to upset a lot of people, right? John Quincy Adams comes in, he's a one-term president. And ultimately, he's not going to be something you need to really, really worry about here. He's going to kind of continue to improve the internal improvements that were going on in the country at the time, the road systems and the canal systems and things like that. But he's going to face an unwilling Congress, and he's going to not really get too much accomplished in that term. So fast forward to the next election now. In 1828, you're going to have a lot of upset people left over from that last election in 1824, and you're going to get a number of these new parties, right? So the Jacksonian Democratic Republicans are going to split off and form what's known as just simply the Democrats, and the people that supported John Quincy Adams are going to be known as the National Republicans. And the big difference is, right, Jackson is going to be kind of this limited government, whereas the National Republicans are going to kind of take up the mantle of the old Federalists, and you're going to get the wanting stronger government and such like that, and you're going to get this big bit of mudslinging between the two of them, right? So what's going to happen is that in 1828, it's going to be a rematch between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, except this time it's going to be a little bit different. So what's going to happen is that new voters are going to change this election, right? And this is going to be a big point. So between 1824 and 1828, you're going to have an influx of new people voting. All of a sudden, people that don't own property are actually able to vote. And when you get that, you're going to get a whole new percentage of white people, white males voting in particular in this election. So in 1824, you're going to get about 26.9% of the eligible voters voting, of the people voting anyway, and then by 1828 you're going to get 57.6. So you can see the graph here, how much that increases in just those 4 years. And most of these people, again, are sharecroppers, they're factory workers, they're going to be brought into politics. These are your common people, right? And that's why Andrew Jackson is going to be kind of considered this president for the common man. And just to recap Andrew Jackson, his nickname is Old Hickory. He's a war hero. He gets this large crowd of farmers and ordinary citizens, to vote for him and ultimately supporting him. He gets this saying, he's tough as an old hickory stick is where he gets this name. And as we said, the small farmers are going to love him. He's going to implement what's called the spoils system, right? Is that basically giving these people that supported him government jobs, even if they weren't necessarily qualified. He felt. What is the demographic allowed to vote? Sorry, I'm answering Malik real fast. It's still all white males. And you don't need to own property anymore. So basically, the spoil system, Jackson's able to get rid of many of the federal workers that were in place and then replace them with supporters of his own. And again, it didn't necessarily matter if they were qualified for the job, just that they were supportive to him. And you get this, to the victor goes the spoils, and you get this political cartoon right here. So anyway, you're going to have this debate going on with Jackson, right? This tariff debate and the nullification crisis. And if you remember, what's going to happen is Jackson is actually going to push this tariff and pass this high tariff and allow this tariff to happen. And you're going to have this man named John C. Calhoun actually argue that the states had the right to nullify laws that were against the state interests. And the argument is that since the federal government is the creation of those states, they're the final authority on the constitutionality of the federal laws. Well, Jackson's not going to like that. Jackson's going to side with the Union. He is the president after all. And the anger of the tariffs, in the South are going to continue to build. You're going to get this, what's called the Tariff of Abomination, they're going to call it. And if you remember, a tariff is a tax on imports and exports in particular. And in doing so, right, a tariff on goods coming in from other countries is going to actually make things more expensive in this country. And for the South, it doesn't have the industry to create those goods, whereas the North does. The North is going to benefit, and the South is going to have to just end up paying more money, right? So they pass this Nullification Act. And what's going to happen is that you're going to have what's known as the Force Bill, and Andrew Jackson is actually going to pass a bill that's allowing the president to use force to enforce acts of Congress and push this thing through, right? You're also going to get the war against the bank, or Andrew Jackson is going to essentially not want the Bank of the United States to continue and to happen. The charter had been established 20 years before, and it was up for renewal. So Andrew Jackson, what he does is he pulls all the money out of the National Bank, and it puts them into what's called pet banks, and in doing so, it's going to hurt the bank completely, and they're not going to get the support that they need to be able to reestablish the charter. You have this political cartoon, Andrew Jackson kind of fighting off and beating off the National Bank here, which is meant to be the dragon, right? So you're going to now, at the end of Jackson, so one more thing you should remember about Jackson is the whole Trail of Tears aspect, right? The Trail of Tears, his actions against the Cherokee Nation in Worcester versus Georgia, the state of Georgia, the Supreme Court victory that the Cherokee are actually, the Supreme Court rules in favor of the Cherokee to allow them to be this kind of independent nation, although Jackson comes in, ignores the Supreme Court ruling, and uses the military to force the Cherokee out of the land anyway. So he's the only president that I know of anyway that goes against the Supreme Court ruling ever. So that's a pretty big deal, and that's why he gets the nickname, right? That's why he gets the nickname of King Andrew the First. I don't know if I have a political cartoon here. There it is right there. So King Andrew. So let's just kind of look at the Trail of Tears here, right? The Cherokee were in northwestern Georgia, and the Trail of Tears also encompass the other 5 civilized tribes of the South: the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Creek, the Seminole, and they're all getting pushed over into what is modern-day Oklahoma, which is basically Indian territory at the time. Okay, so after Jackson destroys the bank and his National Bank and the laissez-faire economic policy that had been introduced, you're going to get what's called the Panic of 1837. You're going to get this economic downfall where land values drop sharply, investments decline, banks fail, businesses fail, farmers plunge into debt and lose their land. And this is all going to come after Jackson is out, and you get this new president named Martin Van Buren. So they entered this thing, right? So Van Buren is going to be looked down upon, and a lot of it's going to be as a result of Andrew Jackson's policies. So Okay, so that's kind of, I would say, the big things you should know about Jackson. As far as the Whigs, you're going to need to just remember them, but I don't think there's going to be too many questions on that. But just to recap, right, you have this man named William Henry Harrison and John Tyler running against Martin Van Buren. And when it really comes down to it, this song Tippecanoe and Tyler too. If you remember, what William Henry Harrison was the hero at the Battle of Tippecanoe. He was the former, I believe, governor of Ohio. So anyway, so William Henry Harrison's going to be elected, right? But remember, this is the guy that dies. He dies catching, he speaks for a while in the inauguration. He catches pneumonia and dies not very long afterwards. So John Tyler is going to become the next president. So John Tyler had once been a Democrat. He lacked party real loyalty, and don't worry too much about him. So, all right, moving on. So this is old stuff for me. Anyway, all right, so that's about it for the Jackson stuff you should know. We're going to get into now the remainder of Chapter 6, which is kind of the changes in society, right, that we're going to be looking at. So let me get that over here. I'm sorry, I wasn't looking at any questions, so let's see if you're all good. No more. I didn't see any extra questions that are typed, so I'm going to keep going here. Right? So remember, right, you're going to have a lot of positive influences and positive changes in society, really, between 1820 especially, and continuing on at this point. You're going to have industry starting to boom, and you're going to have people. These positive things are going to have people really starting to want to even improve the country and things even more, right? So you're going to have this push for reform. So just a reminder, right, you're going to have this large wave of immigration. A lot of these people are from Ireland and Germany. Ireland, these Irish are coming in. You're going to have 2 million or so, a wave of them total. That's going to begin in 1845 with the potato famine. You're going to have Germans that are leaving to escape violence and repression that they were having in their own country. And this is going to create what's called nativism, right? Where people are kind of worried about these immigrants coming into their country, and it's going to produce hostility, towards them. And this really is something that you can still count, onto until today. So one of the reactions to that is this Know Nothing Party, right? And the Know Nothing Party is going to be these group of people that are worried about these Catholic Irish coming in and even Germans. And they're going to kind of form this nationalist, this kind of nativist party where they pledge never to vote for a Catholic and push banning immigrants and things like that. And they don't ever want to have a Catholic from holding public office, just left over from this kind of old religious kind of animosity towards one another's. Okay, and they get this kind of membership in the party was secret, and those questioned about it were obliged to answer, "I know nothing," and that's kind of where they get the name, the Know Nothing Party, right? So you're also going to get the Second Great Awakening, and the Second Great Awakening is kind of this effort by the religious community to revive religion in the country, but it's also going to be this push to help improve yourself, as well as it's also to improve yourself and also society. So this is going to have a big effect. This Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening, anyway. It's going to have a big effect on people's attitude in the country, for sure, towards these reforms, right? So you're going to get new religious groups. You're going to get the different groups. You're going to have the Unitarians, the Universalists, the Mormons, which we talked about. The Mormons are a big one, right? The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They're led by a man named Joseph Smith, who are going to kind of head west ultimately and head into Utah, where they're going to have basically, because of their beliefs, they're going to be kind of fleeing persecution all the way until Utah, where they kind of establish themselves with Brigham Young at that point as their leader of the church after Joseph Smith is actually murdered. So you're going to have this cultural renaissance, right? Nationalism and sectionalism give rise to a creative period of writers and artists and things like that, and many of these leading thinkers of the day are going to adopt tenets of what's called Romanticism, which advocated feeling over reason. One notable expression, of American Romanticism is going to come from the New England writers and philosophers who are known as what's called transcendentalists, and they urge others to overcome the limits of their minds and let their souls reach out to embrace the beauty of the universe. It's this really romantic way of looking at life in general, and these people are going to become classic writers in American history and influencing philosophical thought at the time period. So some of these big writers, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and so on and so on. You can see them here: Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, Edgar Allan Poe, Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson. Right? These are going to become the first real. These are going to become the first real people that are going to be truly American culturalists and writers and things like that. So what ends the Second Great Awakening is just something that's going to kind of fizzle out, honestly. There's not something that doesn't just end on a day. You're going to have kind of ebbs and flow of religious kind of revivals in this country. Remember, there was a first and there's a second and there's even a third and even so on. So it's kind of an ebb and flow, honestly. So some of the reforms, right, you're going to be talking about temperance. Don't forget temperance, this whole idea of moderation in the consumption of alcohol. And you're going to have women who are going to really be trying to reform society by getting rid of alcohol or limiting the amount of alcohol men drink, because men who drank too much, they argue, they spend their family's money on liquor rather than necessities for families, and they sometimes abuse their wives and children and such, right? So you're also going to have this true womanhood, which is basically the idea that coming back on some level that women should be homemakers and should take responsibility for developing their children's character. So this is known as true womanhood. You're going to have the women's rights movement as well at the same time. So it's kind of contradictory to one another here. But the right to vote is going to be beginning to push what's called the Seneca Falls Convention, if you remember. You're going to have the Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions, which are going to draw principles from the Declaration of Independence, and they're going to kind of we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal, right? You got a little thing there. The woman really who takes charge there is named Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and then Susan B. Anthony is going to kind of take the reins of the women's movement from there on. Okay, so you also have the Abolitionist Movement, right? And the Abolitionist Movement is going to be early opposition to slavery, and you're going to have kind of two different ideas for abolition at the first part. You're going to have what's called gradualism, and then you're going to have recolonization. And gradualism is kind of this idea of kind of slowly leading toward the ending of slavery, whereas recolonization is the idea is like, hey, look, we want you all to be free, but we don't actually want you here in this country. So they kind of say, all right, we're going to go resettle Africa, an area in Africa. You're going to get this new country founded called Liberia, where people actually do go leave the United States to go back to Africa. Although, the problem is many of these people, they were actually not from there, or their family hadn't been there. They'd been born in America, and there are many generations in America at this point, so it really just didn't make much sense. So that that kind of fizzles out as well, right? So the rest of the abolition, they argue that enslaved African Americans should be free immediately. So you're going to get other people like that too, without gradual measures and compensation to former slaveholders. They just say slavery should just be done. Goodbye, right? And the big one of that is going to be a man named William Lloyd Garrison, who's going to lead he's going to have this newspaper, an anti-slave newspaper called The Liberator. He's going to argue for complete emancipation, right, which is the freeing of all enslaved people. You're going to have some big African American abolitionists as well. Frederick Douglass is the big one who kind of takes a note from William Lloyd Garrison, and he's going to publish his anti-slavery newspaper as well, called the North Star. We're going to have this other woman named Sojourner Truth, who's going to be another abolitionist, and she's going to have some huge anti-slavery speeches, going to draw big crowds, and give many stories of being a slave and why it's horrible. So you're going to have some response, right, in the North. You're going to have people that disapprove of it, and some don't really care too much. I'm disapproving of it, but I don't really care one way or the other, honestly. But there are people that are going to be gung-ho about it, right? But some people in the North are going to actually fear the end of slavery, right? You're going to have, it's a movement is a threat to the existing social system, for one. It might lead to a war. They could fear an influx of, freed African Americans from the South into the North, disrupting the whole, again, social system. And they didn't want the South's economy to crumble, right? We're all in this together as a country anyway at this point still. So, those are a number of the reform movements. There's a couple more intergraphic organizers you should probably refresh yourselves with, things like the prison reform movement and that kind of stuff. Okay, so we're rolling on here. I think we're moving pretty well. So let me get my next one up here. Let me close this one out. So Manifest Destiny, right, is kind of something that's coming on around the same time. And we're going to be kind of settling these new lands, as we head west, right? And when it really comes down to it, you're going to get many, many new settlers heading west, after 1800. especially, after the Louisiana Purchase. And by 1820, more than 2.4 million people had grown, got into the West. And the number is going to continue to keep going and going. And you're going to get this man who dubs this term, this idea, this God-given right to head west, for Americans to settle the lands west and continue westward, is known as manifest destiny. And here is this famous, painting, and it's kind of showing, this angel basically carrying telegraph wires. You got the people kind of making the move west. You got the buffaloes. You got people getting their own land. You got the train. You got stagecoaches. You got the kind of the Conestoga wagons on these trails heading west, and so on. It's just this picture, showing this divine right, and it's this light aspect over here to the right where America and American society was, and this kind of darker area where America is heading, where it's going to bring the light, essentially, right? So you have these different trails, right, in westward migration, sending people over. The Oregon Trail is the big one. You have the Santa Fe Trail. Don't worry about those too much, but you just know that these things are happening and these people are kind of heading west, right? So here's just a map of those things. You got the Oregon Trail. You got the other trails too. So there's people. Donner Party, remember them? Just as these people they ate themselves, or they ate, when they resorted to cannibalism, they got stuck up in the Sierra Nevada mountains, right, and so on, right? So. Right, you're going to have, moving on, you're going to have some fighting going on in the Mexican borderlands, right? And this is going to kind of lead to squabbles with Mexico and as a country, right? Mexico's going to get its independence from Spain, and then they're, going to want this territory for themselves, and obviously Americans are going to as well. And at the time, in 1821, Mexico's going to control Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, modern day, these places, right? But the Mexican government's going to kind of not really pay too much attention to its northern territories, and Americans are going to kind of creep into that area, right, and begin to settle those regions. So Texas being the big one, right, especially kind of right around here, kind of northeastern Texas at this point, maybe even a little bit of Louisiana, and basically what's happening is you're going to get the American encroachment, Americans moving into here, right, and what's going to happen is you're going to kind of get some Americans starting to want to have their own government and their own republic, in this area, right? So Americans are going to initially accept Mexican citizenship, but later saw no reason to obey the government because, they didn't consider their own. They didn't want to adopt Mexican customs. They didn't want to, adopt the religion and all that stuff that we talked about in your homework and just in class, right? So you're going to get these big guys. You're going to get Stephen Austin and Sam Houston. And in 1830, Mexico's going to close its borders to Americans. It's going to ban the import of enslaved labor and tax goods, imported from foreign countries. And when they do this, the Americans are going to get upset and they're going to start to rebel, right? And when this happens, you're going to get Mexico trying to stop it, and you're going to get the incident at the Alamo, the event at the Alamo, where the Mexican president named Santa Anna is going to organize a force of about 6,000 troops to put down this rebellion of Texans. And what's going to ultimately the Texans are going to hold up in this old mission and this old Catholic church, and basically they're going to be killed. They're going to be taken out, but they're going to kind of buy time for Sam Houston's larger army to kind of reorganize after, as they keep Santa Anna's forces occupied for quite a while, and in doing so buys them time, and it's going to actually come back, and Sam Houston's going to actually win. So at this battle called San Jacinto, I'm probably saying that wrong, San Jacinto, and Houston's army is going to gain this victory and actually capture the Mexican president, Santa Anna, who is pretty cool, right? The Mexican president is leading his band into battle. So Sam Houston's going to force Santa Anna to sign this treaty, and Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and you're going to get the Republic of Texas. And these people are going to want to quickly join the United States, but essentially there's going to be some squabbling going on within the Senate and things like that. It's going to take a little while for Texas to actually be accepted into the Union. About 10 years actually. So for about 10 years, you're going to have Texas as an independent republic, basically. So James K. Polk is now this new guy who's going to come in, and he is going to be elected in the election of 1844, and Polk's going to promise to bring in Texas. He's going to kind of deal with the issues that are still going on in the Oregon Territory. Remember, you still have England kind of encroaching down from over here, and you kind of have Americans and English kind of disputed territory up here and where the actual border and boundary is going to be. And he also kind of talks about buying California from Mexico. And in doing so, Polk's going to actually, he's going to win. He's going to win the election. He's going to try to fulfill these promises. So the first thing is this Oregon Treaty Line, right? You're going to have this kind of going on with England, with Britain, British Canada, and what you're going to have is this rallying cry for a 54 fight, the 54-degree latitude line, which is right about here. They're going to kind of go back and forth, and they're going to negotiate, and ultimately you're going to get it at the 49-degree latitude line, which is right about there. And you're going to get above is going to be British, and below is going to be American. And that's going to be the British treaty, right? So Polk's going to want to get this land, from Mexico. He's going to actually annex Texas, but Mexico is going to be really upset. They're going to break diplomatic relations, and Polk's going to see this as a chance to actually go after this, right? This is kind of really not going to be this is going to be one of these wars that America's actually going to go for it. It's not defensive, it's not anything. We wanted this land, and we're going to kind of make this war happen. So Polk's intention is to buy California from Mexico is going to add to the growing strife that they were having with Mexico, and you're going to get the war. It's going to be led by a man named Zachary Taylor, who's going to cross into Mexico, and ultimately the Mexicans are going to make the first move. The U.S. is going to declare war for Mexico, and you're going to get this war. So you're going to get 73,000 men volunteering to fight, and the United States is going to kind of quickly move into Mexico and actually take the Mexico City, which is the capital, forcing them to surrender, and you're going to get America basically taking this land. They're going to take much of this land. The new border is going to be kind of this Rio Grande River down here, and you're going to get America taking what was modern day California, Arizona, New Mexico. Some of the disputed land still in Texas over here, modern day Texas anyway, and America's going to give them about $15 million. Right, so you're also going to have this Bear Flag Republic, which is California is going to kind of become its own independent republic for a little while until the American naval forces are going to be sent to take possession of California for the United States as well. So just kind of know that happens. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is with the Mexican-American War, not from what we were talking about before. So that's the Manifest Destiny in a nutshell. We now own all of that land from the east to the west. Any questions about that? Sorry, that was kind of quick and maybe a little sloppy too. So if you have any questions, don't be afraid to shoot them my way. And we're getting into the final stretch here with our discussion of kind of the lead up to the Civil War, right? So let's kind of just recap. You got these two different, sectionalism growing between the North and the South, and two major different ways of life, right? The South's going to be agrarian. You're going to have, the South being mostly based off of cotton. Eli Whitney's cotton gin is going to really push that issue. You can see where cotton starts to crop up here by 1860, from 1820 after the invention of the cotton gin. So that's going to be a really big deal. There's going to be very little industry in the South, and when it comes down to it, the Southern factories are the exception rather than the rule, right? Most people don't want to invest the capital into getting that in because cotton farming and cotton, plantations are so profitable, right? So just as looking at a railway map, and this is going to kind of highlight some of what the issues are going to be for the South when we actually get into the Civil War, right? This is the growth of railroad. This is 1830, 1840, 1850. The North is much more, and when you look at it by 1860, which is right on the eve of the Civil War, there's a lot more connectivity in the North than in the South. There are rail lines, don't get me wrong, in the South, but they're going to be privately owned, and not that they're not privately owned up here too, but the government's going to be able to take advantage of those for sure in the North come the war. Okay, so you have different groups of Southerners. The big things are the yeoman farmers, which is kind of the middle class group. You got tenant farmers and rural poor. You have also the plantation owners. You're going to have thousands of these people. Thousands of acres. With hundreds of slaves. But this is kind of a graph of the actual makeup, of the South. Okay, moving on quick here. So don't worry about the slave codes too much, I'd say. You got Nat Turner's Rebellion. Popular religious leader is going to lead a slave revolt in Virginia, which you guys should obviously know for the SOL, since it is U.S. and VA history. And they're going to kill, at least 55 whites in 1831. During this, it's going to pass more, and the whites are just going to pass more strict slave codes in the South, right? You're going to get Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman becoming, out of all of this anyway. Harriet Tubman's going to lead the Underground Railroad with its network of safe houses, getting people to the north, right? All right, so now let's get to the actual events of leading up to the war. That's going to just build this sectionalism, right? We talked about the Missouri Compromise earlier, and it's just going to continue to push this sectionalism, right? So this is kind of what it looks like with the Missouri Compromise. You're going to get Missouri coming in right here as a slave state, and you're going to get Maine coming in as a free state, and they're going to do this line on the 36-degree, 30-minute latitude line right here, and anything above is going to be, possibly for free in the new territory. Anything below, can be slave. So that settles the debate for a little while. You're going to get what's called the Wilmot Proviso in Congress. That's basically going to specify, after Texas wins its independence, when we get, New Mexico and California, you're going to have this Wilmot Proviso that's going to basically suggest that any of these new territories that we acquire from Mexico are not going to allow slavery. And this is just going to kind of continue, again, push that. So Zachary Taylor, as we were kind of saying, is going to be the hero of the Mexican-American War, and he's a member of the Whig Party, and he's going to come in and he's going to urge California and Mexico to apply for statehood. And the question is going to become now again, which are they going to become? Are they going to become free states? Are they going to become slave states? And any new territory that comes in is going to be, asking that question. So I'm going to play this for you guys quick. This is just an animated, I say GIF, but people are going to yell at me for saying it not being GIF. So this is kind of the way it comes in, right? So this is the Missouri Compromise. You get Maine and Missouri, you get the line, and this is kind of just the way it keeps going, right? And every time new territory is up for grabs, you're always going to get people saying, well, is it going to be slave or is it going to be free? And people arguing whether or not it's going to be which side. And when it comes down to it, that matters, again, for the representation in Congress, right? If you have an advantage in Congress, you can pass laws that are going to benefit your side, and that's why they need it and want it, okay? So beautiful. So the next big thing is this Compromise of 1850, right? So California is going to be coming in, right? And what are we going to do? Is it going to become a free or is it going to be slave? And the compromise is that it's going to become in as a free state. But any area of, New Mexico is going to have no restrictions on slavery. This is not a state yet, but the territory is going to have no restrictions, right? You're going to settle this New Mexico and Texas border dispute for sure. And then you're going to get slave trade, but not slavery is going to be abolished from Washington, D.C. But the big aspect of this for the South is this push of a stronger fugitive slave law, right? And the fugitive slave law is going to become this big, big aspect of this for the South. This is John C. Calhoun and really Henry Clay promoting the compromise. You're going to have these different people kind of having this emotional debate in Congress. And it's going to be 5 separate bills. It's going to get all of these things different passed, right? And it's meant to be the final settlement on the issue, right? It's always final, just like the Missouri Compromise was supposed to be, right? So let's talk about the Fugitive Slave Act. It's going to require all citizens to help catch runaway slaves in the North, right? Anyone who aids a fugitive can be fined or even imprisoned. So the South's going to believe, South believed would force, and this is going to force the North to recognize Southern rights, is what the South's hoping. And it's really just going to anger the North. It's going to convince them, against slavery more. Northern juries are going to refuse to convict. People just ignoring the rule completely. And it's really going to annoy the South even more. And technically, yes, it's against the law, but people are just going to ignore it. This is just a flyer, caution colored people of Boston, one and all. If you are hereby respectfully cautioned and advised to avoid conversing with the watchmen and the police officers, about kidnappers and slave catchers. This whole story of 7 Years a Slave and the man named Solomon Northup. That whole movie is about a man who actually was a free African American who's going to actually be kidnapped and brought back during this time period, brought to the South, and actually be sold into slavery, even though he was actually a free man. So next big thing is you're going to get the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This is going to actually be under the man named Franklin Pierce as the president. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to be led by a man named Stephen Douglas, who is going to look to encourage the growth of the Transcontinental Railroad. And he's going to propose organizing this region west of Missouri, and Iowa and into Kansas and Nebraska, and encouraging it for the growth of the railroad and getting a railroad all the way across the country, right? And as they were both above the 36-30 degree line, this is going to seem like they're going to become free states, and this is going to seriously tip the balance in favor of the North. And the South is going to be really, really upset with this. So naturally, they debate and they argue and get pissed off and frustrated. And you're going to have this idea of popular sovereignty, which is going to actually allow the people of those states to actually decide whether it's going to be free or slave, right? And many Northerners are going to actually oppose this, right? It's going to allow slavery into areas that had been free since 1820 potentially, but obviously it's going to have this huge amount of Southern support. So this is going to pass in 1854, and immediately you're going to have this kind of push into the territory by both sides, trying to get an upper leg in the voting for whether or not it's going to be free or slave. And you're going to have pro-slavery legislation established in Kansas, but you're also going to have people pushing against it. And you're actually going to get multiple constitutions in Kansas as well. And the numbers are going to seriously swell before the elections, and you're going to get pro-slavery people actually voting, crossing just to vote, and traveling in armed groups that are actually roughing up, anti-slavery people. So this is kind of the Compromise of 1850, and then this is after the Kansas-Nebraska Act. You can see the territory being reorganized, and now it's just a matter of actually making it states when it gets enough people. So the anti-slavery is going to refuse to accept the laws created by the pro-slavery legislature in Kansas, and you're going to get this violence taking place between the different groups, and it's going to be called Bleeding Kansas, and in certain cases you're actually going to have slavery supporters attacking a town of anti-slavery supporters known as Lawrence, Kansas. You're also going to have retaliation by John Brown killing a number of people that was called Pottawatomie Creek, killing 5 pro-slavery people, and you're going to get this kind of bloodshed going back and forth. It's just really, really ugly. And to top that off, you're going to get the caning of Charles Sumner. Charles Sumner is going to deliver this huge anti-slavery speech. And it's this crime against Kansas. He's going to criticize pro-slavery senators, especially this one guy named Andrew Butler. And then 2 days after the speech, a man named Preston Brooks is going to walk into the House chamber, and he's going to actually beat Charles Sumner bloody and unconscious right at the Senate floor. And this is going to kind of just continue to fuel that hatred and animosity between the different groups, right? And then top that off, you're now going to get a new political party that's establishing. You're going to get what's called the Free Soilers. Don't worry too much about them. But you're going to get, this kind of division between sectional lines again, for sure. All right. So going into our election of 1856, John C. Fremont is going to be up against this man named James Buchanan, who's a Democratic candidate who's going to kind of endorse this idea of popular sovereignty. And in so much so, he's going to actually be waiting for the Supreme Court ruling on the issue. James Buchanan is going to win. And ultimately, this is what the election looks like, but don't worry about that too much. And you're going to get the Supreme Court decision coming down and not too long after, and what's called the Dred Scott decision. The Supreme Court's going to announce this. It's going to shake the nation. It's going to announce this decision about slavery in the territories. So the story is that Dred Scott was an enslaved African American bought by an army doctor in Missouri, which was a slave state. And the doctor's going to move around. It's going to go to Illinois, to Wisconsin, to Missouri, and around, and everything like that. And ultimately, Dred Scott's argument is that he should be free because he was living on free soil, and if you're in a free soil, then how can you possibly be a slave? So the decision is going to come down by this man named Roger Taney, this Chief Justice, and he's going to come down with arguably, what many people obviously that don't like slavery anyway, is going to argue is the worst ruling in Supreme Court history. And he's going to say that Dred Scott is still a slave and he's not a citizen, therefore, because he's a slave, right? He's property, he's not a citizen. And therefore, he actually had no right to bring that lawsuit. And because of, he was property, the Fifth Amendment actually prohibits Congress from taking away property without due process. And therefore, Congress actually has no power to prohibit slavery in any of the territories, because anyone from the South can then bring their property of slaves up to the North. And this is actually going to basically throw out the Missouri Compromise and the whole idea of popular sovereignty at all, right? If you own slaves in the South, then you can just bring them to the North. And then what's the difference between a free state and a slave state? And this is going to cause an absolute uproar, right? Huge, huge uproar. And this is actually Dred Scott right here. You're going to, actually, there's one D there, so that's a mistake on my part. So it's a huge, huge uproar, right? The South's absolutely ecstatic, and the North's going to be outraged, right? And you're going to get anti-slavery groups forming, and you're going to get this kind of the advent of what's known as the Republican Party, about this wicked and false judgment. Don't forget about Uncle Tom's Cabin and Harriet Beecher Stowe as well. Uncle Tom's Cabin is this book that Harriet Beecher Stowe authors that is ultimately about slavery and the horrors of slavery. That's going to sell, thousands and thousands of copies across the country. It's going to kind of help spread the idea that abolitionists that wants, right, to get rid of slavery, and the South's going to hate that again, but the North's going to push this out. You're going to get what's known as the Lincoln-Douglas debates, right? Abraham Lincoln's going to come into the swing at this point in 1858 as a senator, trying to win a Senate seat against Stephen Douglas. So this just to know about these Lincoln-Douglas debates. And basically, Douglas, is going to actually win the election for senator, and it's going to and Lincoln's going to become popular as a result of them, and he's going to kind of pave the way for his presidential run, right? So we're heading into the real home stretch now, and you're going to get this raid on Harpers Ferry, right, by John Brown, nonetheless, the same guy that had attacked people in Kansas. He is going to basically lead men into Harpers Ferry, Virginia, to attack an arsenal. And the idea is to take these arms and bring them to slaves and start a rebellion, right? He's going to be caught, and actually by Robert E. Lee is going to be the one that's leading this kind of against him. And he's going to be executed in the South. And the question is going to come up, right? Is he a hero or is he a martyr, right? Has he got this cause of abolition? People are going to like him for that, and, the South is going to absolutely hate John Brown. This is going to be another one of those things that's going to just fuel the tension between the different groups, right? You just have this growing and growing tension. So he hung for treason, right, Captain John Brown. And lastly, you're going to be getting this election of 1860, right? You're going to have major talks of secession, if they have to put up with anything about, like John Brown's raids. You're going to get splitting down the line in the Democratic Party. You're going to have Stephen Douglas and his kind of idea of popular sovereignty still pushing that out there. And John C. Breckinridge is going to support the Dred Scott decision. Ultimately, the Republican Party is going to come in now, is going to actually nominate Lincoln, and the platform is going to be designed to attract many different types of voters, and slavery would be left undisturbed where it existed, but it would be excluded from the new territories as kind of their push. Lincoln's going to be elected in a landslide, but what do you notice about this map? It's going to basically be that Lincoln's going to win the election without getting a single popular vote from the South. And because there were two Democratic candidates, it's going to split the vote. So Lincoln is going to win in a landslide, and the South is going to be livid, so much so he's only going to receive 40% of the popular vote. Completely sectional vote, right? And he doesn't receive any votes from the South, as we just said, and the South is going to secede. It's going to start leaving, right? South Carolina is going to leave in December 20th, 1860, and you're going to get attempts at compromise again, but it's not going to happen, and you're going to get now this secession of southern states, and these are the dates that they actually secede. You're going to get the first group, and then you're going to get the second group, which is going to be actually after Fort Sumter. You get the border states and things like that, which we obviously talked about in class, and you actually did a map in the last class we had. You're going to get next the Confederate States of America, right? The CSA are these southern states, right? You're going to get this confederation. You're going to get more of these states, joining up and seceding. They're going to choose this man named Jefferson Davis as president. They're going to justify, the states' rights. This it's the states' rights to have these slaves and things like that, and they're fighting for their states' rights to have these abilities, and the federal government not kind of mind its own business. They voluntarily entered the Union, so they voluntarily can leave. There was refusal, right, of the Fugitive Slave Act in the North, which it wasn't fair, and ultimately they were denying equal rights in the territories. It was always seemed to go the Union's way. The question is going to come down to, which states in particular are they going to join the Union? Are they going to remain? What's the deal? So if force was decided to be used against the Confederate States, what's going to happen with these border states? Are they going to leave? Are they going to stay in? Lincoln is going to kind of vow, right, that secession is not going to be permitted. It's going to begin to enforce the laws and try to, enforce the laws in the South, and vow to keep federal land in the South, and it's going to lead to Fort Sumter. The South's going to test this. They're going to attack at Fort Sumter or Charleston, and you're going to get the start of the Civil War, right? The Confederates are going to decide to take the fort, and April 12th, 1861, congratulations, the war is starting, and I think that is where we can leave it tonight. So I think, considering how much material we just went through, I think we did it very, very quickly. So if there's any questions about any of it, please get them out now. And if not, I will let you guys all go to study for your test tomorrow. Don't forget that you have the 3x5 index card that you are allowed to bring, and you are allowed to bring whatever you would like into the test, as far as on that 3x5 index card, front and back. And as Mr. McNabb says, don't let it have wings, or we will be snipping. Okay? So you get the war. Boom. All right, so if there are no more questions, I'm going to kind of sign off. So I think I'm just getting caught up on the video with you guys. I know you guys are a minute behind or so I'll give it about 30 more seconds for questions, and if not, I am done. Good night, guys. I wish you luck studying. So see you guys tomorrow or Thursday.